a wise guy.
On 10. I'm the 1 + 9. Multiply, you get a dime. You know I ain't got your time on 10.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Smack Talk. I am joined by a Canadian Comedy Award-nominated comedian, podcaster, and a vlogger now. Ladies and gentlemen, Julien Dionne. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. By the way, I have to say, this MS Teams thing was really triggering some pandemic PTSD, trying to sort of, I don't know why I always have issues with Teams.
Yep.
If we could get Bill Gates on the line, because I don't know, Zoom seems a little more straightforward. Teams, every time I'm sent a link, I'm in the waiting room, they don't see it, it's the wrong email, it's this big thing. So my anxiety shot through the roof when we were I was 5 minutes behind. And I see the link because I re-downloaded Zoom yesterday. I haven't had it on my computer since, well, probably the pandemic. Re-downloaded Zoom and everything, and I made the settings so it all sounded and looked good. And then I clicked the link, and it's MS Teams. Oh fuck! I started having a panic attack. I'm like, this is fucking August 2021. Can we curse on this, by the way?
Absolutely, man. Fuck yeah.
Right. Or cunt. Go ahead.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for joining us. And you are not in the same city that I am. You are in New Brunswick, like you said, the East Coast. I am an East Coaster as well, and I am trapped in here in Quebec. I still love it. Love it. But Julien, man.
By the way, you don't have to say you love it. For the record.
I got family here, so fuck it.
Okay.
Just the family, I guess.
And also, sorry to cut you off. We're from the East Coast. Where are you from?
Newfoundland.
Oh shit! All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are closer now geographically than from here to Newfoundland. Every time I travel and for stand-up or whatnot, and I tell people I'm from New Brunswick, they're like, "Oh, I know some people in Newfoundland." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I'm in Toronto now, which is closer than Newfoundland. Newfoundland is out there, man. It's far.
It's out there, and it's fucking huge too, man. Like people are like, "Oh, like St. John's must be close to Port aux Basques or something." Man, they are worlds apart. It's another fucking planet, man. Newfoundland is huge.
Did you have to work on not having the accent? You have zero Newfoundland accent.
I went to school. My parents tried to torture me and put me in elementary school in Quebec. So everything has been wiped out, man. I've been brainwashed, and now I am. Thankfully, I'm completely bilingual now. So, yeah.
I was gonna say and ask actually because where you came from, what's your background? Because I started seeing your shit pop up on my news feed
good
last year or something like that.
Yeah.
And these high quality clips and stuff. I'm like, who is this Johnny B guy? Where's he coming from? Because you're based out of Gatineau and perfectly bilingual.
Yep.
And so nice to know that you're in Newfoundland. But what's your background and how'd you start podcasting and why? Are you in show business at all, or is it just
not really, man? So, okay, well, perfect. I think me and you are gonna click a little bit because of the mentality, but I went to journalism school, sir, and I completely hated it. I was turned away by the culture. I thought I was going to be a world-class journalist. The same thing like Anthony Bourdain. I used to grow up watching Anthony Bourdain with my mother, so I was like, addicted to travel, going into these weird places, and I wanted to talk about it. And
look where he ended up. Go ahead.
Yeah, what a great example. Yeah. I got a couple of years left. I'm good. Yeah. Yeah, man. And then I went into journalism school, and I realized, okay, well, this isn't really journalism, because at the end of the day, you don't really have a say. You're just a actor. So that completely turned me away from that, and I got a terrible note on my last project to get the degree, so I quit. I fucking quit, and I said, you know what, man, I'm going to start my own shit, and it felt like everything just happened for a reason after that. I met a guy with Ergon, which you've been to before, the fully automated podcast studio in Gatineau. I started there, and then I met Matt, and 2 years later, and it's good. It's good. Having fun.
Did Maddie's podcast studio move? Is it still in his parents' house?
It's a new location.
Oh,
but
new location.
Man,
nice.
It's gorgeous. This guy's a fucking genius, man.
He's dialed in, that guy, and he's like 14 years old. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so how old are you, Johnny B?
I am 26, sir.
Okay, youngin, little young buck.
Absolutely,
oh, that's
man.
good.
Yeah, and I grew up watching stand-up comedy too, man. So I always had that little, I wanted to talk on a microphone, and so now I'm here talking to you, brother.
Do you ever have the desire of doing stand-up now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I told that to Matt too, and Matt said, fuck it, do it in French. But I think I conversate better in English. I have a better flow in English. So I'm kind of scared, man. And you're like the king of doing both languages. So how is that, man? How do you manage doing stand-up in English and French? Because it's completely, dude, like the languages are different, the cultures are different, just the way you pronunciate stuff, the way you like catchphrases and stuff are different. Like, how do you do it?
Well, first, let me say that if you have any inkling at doing it at all, you have to dive in and just do it a million times. Get on any stage that you can and start now, because you're going to suck for some time. Yeah. And it's going to be embarrassing and difficult because stand-up is the only art form that I can think of off the top of my head. Actually, I've been saying that it might not be, but it's one of the only art forms, if not the only, that you have to develop. You can only develop any sort of meaningful progress is only done on stage. You can't practice in your shower with a shampoo bottle or in front of a mirror or in your car. It doesn't, I mean, it might help you remember some of the words, but if you do that too much, then you're just in your head on stage and trying to think of a script rather than being present in the moment in the room, which is where a lot of the magic happens. So you have to develop on stage, and as many times as you can. The only way to get better is by hopping up on every mic, every stage that you can. And while you're doing it, you're like, oh shit, I'm getting laughs. This isn't too bad. I'm actually doing it. And then a few years go by and you look back, you're like, Jesus, that was embarrassing. But it's the only way. And so, and it's not as terrible as it seems, because again, you're getting laughs, you're doing it. But when you get into it, your taste, because you're a comedy fan, as you said, so you know what good comedy is, you have sensibilities, you know what you like, right? Well, your ability and your taste don't match up. It's impossible. You have no skill set when you start. You start at ground zero. And there's a great Ira Glass from NPR, Ira Glass quote on YouTube. If you YouTube it to any of the listeners, it's just about the advice he could give to anybody starting in a creative venture. And it's just to work through an immense body of work, right for the trash, as if no one will see it, and work, because the only way to bridge that gap between your skill set and your tastes is by working through a body of work, just volume. Yeah. And then eventually, after time, things click, but it takes a long ass time. That's why I say start now, because it's just one of those. First of all, it's extremely difficult, and I think since you're bilingual, it is a good thing to do both, because you're kind of working those two muscle groups at the same time. And I'm like you, man, like I conversate better in English, even though French is my first language. I grew up here in New Brunswick. I'm Acadian French.
Acadian.
And Acadian.
Yes, sir.
So Acadians are different than Quebecers in the sense that we're like Quebecois people. It's admirable. They have their own culture, their own arts and entertainment. There's a huge star system, but they consume everything from a young age in French, right? Like The Simpsons were dubbed in French, and the guy playing Homer was a huge celebrity, and all this kind of stuff. So you consume Quebec content, whereas in on Acadie, we consumed American content. We barely have. I mean, we have some Acadian artists. Now there's a lot of people doing some awesome work in all different fields. When I started, there wasn't much. It was pretty much music, and so we would consume everything pop culture in English. We'd consume all English TV and English books and all this. So, for me, when I started, I was a huge Seinfeld fan, the show, and I always loved his stand-up at the beginning and at the end.
Me too. And what's the deal with Airplane Peanuts, huh?
Yeah. Well, his album, I was just talking to somebody about this recently. His album, I'm Telling You for the Last Time, that came out in, I think, 98. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the best pound for pound hours of stand-up ever. It's so good. And so we would consume all that. So that being said, French my first language, I was just more comfortable, and it just seemed like a more natural thing to start in English. And in 2006, I was living in Moncton, and Yuck Yucks opened in Moncton. I couldn't believe it. I was actually thinking of doing stand-up for a while, and I was like, quote unquote, writing. So many people say that. They go, I want to be a comedian. You go, well, you should do it. They go, but I've been writing for years. I mean, it doesn't do anything to write. I mean, it gives you ideas of kind of premises that you're gonna tackle and try out on stage when you start. But so I had this shoebox filled with notes of napkins and just little ideas and stuff for about 4 years before I started. And I was going to plan this kind of open mic tour, and the closest thing to Moncton that had any kind of comedy a comedy stage I could jump on was Montreal. So I was going to take time off work. I was an insurance salesman at the time. I was going to take time off work and go to Montreal and go to Ottawa and go to Toronto and just do these open mics. I'd looked it all up, printed that all out, printed the MapQuest directions, which is what you had to do back in the day. And that was all in that shoebox. I had it already. And I told my girlfriend at the time I wanted to be a comedian, and she's like, "You're not a comic. What are you talking about?" And then she, to her credit, brought home a newspaper ad of a Yuck Yucks opening in Moncton, and I could not believe it because at the time nothing fun like that happened around here. I'm like, oh my God. And I knew the brand. I knew Yuck Yucks.
Oh, for sure.
And so I'm like, that's crazy. So I started in English because that was the first club. It didn't even cross my mind to do it in French at the time. And so I started in 06, and it was a great time to start because there weren't many comics showing interest locally. There was JC Surette, my good buddy that I've known pre-comedy, who has a great career in French. So we started together at Yuck Yucks in Moncton. But there's just a handful of us, and I had a car, and Yuck Yucks opened in Moncton and Halifax at the same time. So they would fly in these headliners to do a weekend in Moncton and then the weekend after in Halifax. But in between, they had all these one-nighters peppered all over the Maritimes, every buck-fuck town, every small little
every
place.
Fucking cove. Yeah.
Yeah. Every cove, and so I had a car, and I had the ambition to do it. So they would book me to open for these headliners on the road, and I stunk. I mean, I was not good at comedy for many, many years. So I would do guest spots on the weekends in both Moncton and Halifax. And then during the week, I would drive to these small towns. I would do 15 minutes, which was an eternity. I had maybe 2 solid minutes, and debatable. I use the word solid loosely. And, but the learning curve was great. So I was really immersed in the English world. And in 09, JC went to l'École nationale de l'humour in Quebec, and I continued in English. And so for me, it was just a natural thing to do it in that language first. And then it was many, many years before I did it in French. My first French set was in 2018. So I was already, 12 years into comedy, doing it in English before I did my first. And it was kind of an accident. The first time, because I had been asked many times to do it in French, and I was like you mentioned, it's the nuances are different.
I know, me too, man. That's my reaction too. Like I don't know, it feels like I'm not comfortable. You know,
well, you're not. But you best start early so that you will get comfortable sooner. When I started, my first French set was as part of the Hubcap Comedy Festival here in Moncton, and I was on a bilingual show at the Capitol Theater. And it was myself, Derek Sagan was hosting. I was on it, Eddie King and Neve and somebody else, I can't remember. And it was like bilingual. So I just assumed I was doing English stand-up. And about a week before, the director of the festival called me. He's like, how's your French set coming along? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? He's like, well, we're doing bilingual in the way that the French comics are going to attempt English and the English comics are going to do French. I'm like, Jesus. And I had a week to prepare, and in my true nature, I did nothing for 6.5 days. And on the day I was doing that gala set, I was at the gym with my buddy Aaron Berg, who's a great comedian out of Toronto. He's been in New York now for 12, 13 years, doing very well down there. and we're working out. He's like, "What's wrong?" I go, "I'm nervous for tonight." He's like, "Why?" I go, "Because I have to do a French set." He's like, "You're French." I'm like, I know, but I don't know. I feel different. He's like, "And you're a comic." He's like, "Shut the fuck up with this shit." He goes, "Just
common sense. Fuck off.
Yeah, I go, but I haven't done anything." He's like, "Just shut the fuck up." He goes, you go there and just do what you do in English in French, idiot." And it really calmed me down when he said that. I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right. I'm overthinking this." And I had the benefit that it was in my hometown, so I had a lot of people I knew in the audience. It's about a 700 or 800 seater theater. And so I could really do it in my dialect and in my accent. I didn't have to make any effort. And I really just translated the 10, 12-minute set I was going to do in English in French in real time.
On the spot, yeah.
On the spot. And it went great. And total fluke. And François Simard, who was with Juste pour rire management at the time, was in the audience, and he really liked my set, and we talked. And then I didn't do stand-up again in French for another year. And about a year later, he contacted me asking me to do a TV taping in French, a gala taping, Les Galas d'un Rire à l'Autre, which was under the Just for Laughs umbrella in Edmonton. It was part of Les Rendez-vous de la Francophonie. So this forced me, for the first time, I basically took the same set I did in Moncton. And when you do TV sets, you have to submit your script, basically word for word, what you're going to say, and then they feed it into a teleprompter and so on. And they have to approve everything. Yeah. So it forced me to sit down for the first time and really write in French. Because when I did it in Moncton in English, or in my first French set, there was a lot of English words, and I just spoke the way I speak. So this way, writing it out forced me to kind of just write it out, take out the English words.
Proper grammar.
Proper grammar. But to your point, how the different nuances and stuff, I basically just did an American style French set, and it went great. But then I started working with P.B. Rivard, great comedian friend of mine in French, to kind of Quebecese my scripts. Yeah. So I've done about a dozen TV tapings since in French. And so every time I would write it out word for word, and then I'd sit with him. And then to your point about the nuances and the beats and stuff in French, he would say, "Okay, switch these words. That expression, it makes sense in English. It makes zero sense in French. We say this instead," and so on and so forth. So it took some time to adjust between the two. This is a long way to answer your question, but so in English, you could wake me up at 3 a.m., give me a microphone, and say, "Do an hour," and no problem, because I've been doing it so long. It'll be 18 years in December, and I kind of think that way. But in French, still to this day, and I've done hundreds of sets in French, there's still a like a nanosecond of thought that I have in my brain that keeps me on my toes, especially when I perform in Quebec. When I perform in New Brunswick.
Exactly.
I don't have to think. I could just talk the way I talk in French, which is very different than Quebecois French. It's a thick accent.
Yeah.
It actually kind of sounds like Newfoundland in French.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, honestly.
Yeah, like the way we roll our R's and like kind of. So when I perform in Quebec, there's just,
but isn't that like a part of your character in a certain sense? It becomes. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And you know what? Even when I make an effort in Quebec, when I think I'm speaking like fucking Parisian or Quebecois French perfect to the letter, people are like, "Jesus Christ, your Acadian accent is thick." I'm like, really? Because if any one of my friends saw me right now, they would make fun of me till forever. I would never live it down based on how much I'm twisting my words and sounding Quebecois. But I still have the accent, which, yes, it kind of becomes part of the character. And although I don't really like to say part of the character, because I really am myself on stage. I try to be as close to who I am off stage on stage. So there is definitely a difference between the two. I will say Quebec audiences are easier than Anglophone audiences, for sure.
Less judgmental, I guess. More like they're probably all drunk and fucked up, right? So it's easier to flow, I guess.
I think the flow, but also the savviness. I think English, because there's so much comedy out there on Netflix and YouTube and so on. that English crowds tend to be a little more savvy. Like if you could do something super hacky in French and just blow the roof off the place, whereas in English sometimes it'd be like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to explain the difference, but French audiences are a little easier. I would say actually a lot easier, just as far as, because Quebec tends to be, I mean, the gap is a little less, but a few years behind what the comedy trends tend to be in, say, the States, just a little bit. You know, there'll be certain topics or stuff I'll hear some comics in French do that in English. I mean, that's old kind of hacky stuff. That gap is getting shorter because, as I mentioned, all the Netflix and YouTube specials and so on, and Quebecois people consume all that now. They listen to podcasts, American podcasts, and stand-up specials and so on. So that gap is a little less.
Yeah.
Like what was funny in the States in the 80s, Quebec comics were doing that in the 90s, like a full decade behind.
Yeah.
Now it's maybe a few years, but there's still some. Yeah. And Quebec comedy can be sometimes quite corny.
But it kind of works, though. You know, it's a part of the culture, yeah.
Of course, and I don't mean any disrespect when I say that.
No, of course
I just
not.
mean there's kind of there's a lot of characters in Quebecois, which in English that's kind of like you don't do characters. It's like weird. There's like one or two guys that do characters. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But even then, it's not like the Dr. Phil thing. He'll do special appearances on podcasts and stuff, but it won't be his act on the road. Like he does Adam Ray on the road,
of course,
when he does clubs and he does his stand-up. Whereas as far as in Quebec, there's just full-blown acts that are straight up characters, which is corny, not in a negative way. I mean, corny, it's fine. It's comedy. It brings joy to people. It makes people laugh. And there's a cynicism in American comedy too.
Yeah.
That would prevent you, that even if you had a great character and you wanted to do it, you would have these voices in your head that would try to talk to you against doing it, because it's that corny element of, people are going to be ripping you apart in the green room.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a difference between the two. I appreciate both audiences. I love performing for Quebec audiences. I love doing shows in Quebec. As I mentioned, the arts and culture is second to none in Canada, especially. It is like a micro United States as far as like how to do it and the system of it.
They have a fucking school for it, man, which is nuts.
Yeah.
And I want your opinion on that, though. Can you learn comedy from school? Like,
no.
is it, no. Okay. Yeah. So it's,
you can't learn comedy from school, but it's good in the sense that it's a safe environment
for you to practice,
and it will get you on stage. So people will rag on comedy courses and classes in schools, because now it's the only way to learn really is by, as I said, doing it on stage a million times, traveling, going on the road, eating a big bag of dicks, bombing, learning. That's really the only way. School will accelerate that process in the way that it cultivates an environment of like-minded people. It's supportive, and it gets you on stage and enforces you to write. It gives you structure. And there are certain rules in comedy that they will teach you that you would otherwise have to learn on your own, and it takes a long time. So it does help speed up some of those things. But as far as genuinely being authentically funny and undeniable on stage, the only way to do it is by getting up a million times.
Why comedy? I want to get deep a little bit, man. Why comedy? Because usually, like, big comedy fans and stuff, we all have one thing in common, is that we fucking hate each other. We hate ourselves, you know what I mean? So, at the end of the day, why did you start comedy? Was there anything that, sparked that interest, or?
It's funny you say we all hate ourselves. I mean, that is I push back on that every time I hear that a little bit, because darkness can really, you can get a lot of good stuff out of it. I think comedy comes from anything that elicits a strong emotional response, positive or negative. So if I'm living my life and something really negative happens, that can be spun into anything that elicits any strong emotional response. You can kind of bring on stage and because it's coming from such a real place and such an intense place, it can be very funny. It's funny that my buddy Peter Anthony had this funny joke because a few years back, about 10 years ago, this article came out in the Toronto newspaper, the Toronto Sun, I think, or something. Anyway, it was in the Sun. It doesn't matter. And this guy wrote out this article saying that every stand-up comedian is a psychopath on some level. They have psychopathic tendencies.
Okay.
And
so
my
do
buddy
politicians, you know, but okay.
Yes, yeah. So do many people. I mean, dentists.
Yeah, exactly. School bus drivers, everyone, man.
Yeah. But my buddy had a funny line. He's like, this article just came out, and it had just come out, and I was living in Toronto at the time, so it was fresh in people's minds. But he goes, this article came out saying that all comedians are psychopath. He goes, that's bullshit. I want to find the guy that wrote this article and cut his fucking head off. So, but comedy comes from a dark place, but also when I'm happy in my life and things are going well, I also can produce good content. So it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to hate yourself or have to be depressed to create good material. I mean, we talked about Jerry Seinfeld. There's always like an underlying anger to it, I would say, which comes from it, not necessarily directed towards yourself. You could love yourself and just be these certain things that trigger, again, an emotional response where there's like even Seinfeld, the cleanest kind of guy, has this undertone of anger to his stuff and the way he says stuff, and you see his fan interactions, and sometimes he's just like a huge dick, but it doesn't mean he hates himself or that he's depressed.
Yeah.
And for me personally, why comedy? When I was younger, I was a late bloomer. I was like 4'11" until I was 18, and like had a high voice, and like I would call my buddy Rick's house back when we had landlines. And 10 times out of 10, I would call his house and be like, hey, is Rick there? And I'd hear, Rick, phone. I don't know. It's a girl every time. And so for me, I realized at a very young age that humor was kind of like the great equalizer. By being funny and ripping on people, we kind of all were 4'11" with a high voice, or I was a little taller with a deeper voice. But because I remember I was in the 8th grade, and we had gone on a field trip to Fundy National Park, and we were on a bus, and I can't remember what I was saying or doing, but when we were coming back, I was basically doing stand-up on the bus, and people were laughing, and I remember feeling, okay, this is how I can connect with people without having to stand on an apple box.
It's a weapon for bullies, man.
It really is. Yeah. And so that was kind of my thing, and I just became funny. My family's funny. My dad, all my uncles, everybody in my family's very funny. Acadians by nature are hilarious because we had nothing for so long. We were poor people, so they would sit around a campfire and just rib each other and tell jokes, and they're great storytellers. And I mean, my friends, when we get together, it's like being with comics, and none of them are comics. Like just the way they you'll say something funny and another guy will add a tag to it. Another guy will tag it. And it's just the way they talk. If you're around comedians and they do that, you go, ugh, this is annoying because people are just, it's like a pissing contest.
Yeah.
But I used to think that, but I'm like, oh no, it's just the way comics think and it's the way we are. And it's just, it's not really a pissing contest. It's just the way, because my friends made me realize this a few summers back. I came to visit and I realized they spoke like comedians, and devastatingly funny, my friends. So I think that's why comedy, and it was just always a kind of a dream. And when we graduated high school, I don't know if kids still do this, but we would exchange wallet-size graduation photos, and you'd write a message behind it.
Yeah. Now it's dick pics on Snapchat, but it's different. Times have changed, you know?
Yeah. And, I would write it with a quail feather and ink. And
send it to my pigeon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but so many people wrote on the back of
Sick.
the photos that they would send to me that no doubt you're going to be a comedian one day and all this and that. So just kind of that planted the seed. I never really thought it was a career option. I thought it might just be something I would do on the side. And then when I started doing it in 2006, I jumped in both feet, and the rest is history.
When did you have that feeling like, you know what, okay, like I'm comfortable like leaving my job right now and doing this as like full time? Was it in 2006? Was it a little bit like further? Did you still have like jobs when you were doing stand up, or how did that work?
It was, I remember I was just a few months into stand up, maybe 6-8 months into stand up, and I was starting to get a lot of work. And again, I preface by saying I stunk, but it's one of those things you have to dive in, right? To do it fully, you have to. And I was selling insurance at the time, and Moncton's a small town,
Yeah.
so I would, it was known that I was doing comedy at the local club here on weekends and so on, and I had these clients, and I talked to my sister, who is a writer, very phenomenally talented writer, and she's a big inspiration on just kind of having a creative endeavor as a career and going for it, and sky's the limit, and take the leap and the net will appear and all these sorts of things. And she was in town, and I was having coffee with her. I'm like, I don't know, I love stand up. I hated my job. And she goes, just quit. Just get a mindless job, because insurance and finance, it's like all consuming, right? It's a 24/7 thing. You bring it home. She said, get a serving job or something, and just do something mindless and just go for it full tilt. You're 23 years old. Just go for it. And I was like, you're right. And so I was on a sales call with my boss, came with me one day just to try to close this big client. And when we walked into the guy's office, he was like, so when are we going to see you on TV and all this? And when we left, my boss was like, you're going to have to choose. And he was saying this in a positive, supportive way, not like you have to choose, we're going to fire you if you don't.
You're going
stop
like
doing
eventually.
comedy.
Yeah.
He was saying because we're in the business of retirement planning and so on. So people want to deal with someone that they know will be their advisor for many, many years, not a 23-year-old that they think they might see on TV one day and have this other career. So it's like you're going to have to decide. So I just had that conversation with my sister. So then this was a Thursday, I went to my boss's office, who had been to some shows and everything. And I said, I want to resign, and I'm going to do comedy full time. And my boss was great. They said to me, go for it. And your office is always here. If you want to try it for a few years, it doesn't work out, come back to us. You'll always have a place with us. So I gave my letter of resignation on that Thursday. Then right after, there was a French restaurant here at the time, and I was walking by, and my friend was the manager there, and I started talking, and I was telling her exactly what I was telling you, what I'm telling you now, word for word. I was like, yeah, my sister just said work in a restaurant or something. She's like, hello, you're standing in a restaurant. I'm the manager. Do you want a job? I'm like, fuck yeah, sure. So I started serving, which was great. You make $200-300 cash every shift, and it's flexible enough that I could do stand up, and they understood stand up was a priority. So if I had gigs, I wouldn't be able to work. And so I served for many years. It was I served in Moncton here, and then I served in Ottawa, and then in New York City for a couple of years. I worked in a Greek restaurant there. And then when I lived in Toronto, I worked. So I kind of served for the first 10, 11 years of my career as a side gig. And in fact, it was really only when I started doing comedy in French that I felt truly comfortable to not have to ever worry about a day job again, because it supplemented my income in a way enough that I didn't have to. And there was enough work with doing it in both languages to support me and make a pretty decent living. And then since then, things have only gotten better and better. And so it's been many years that I haven't had to have a job really. And so it's been great, but I had one for a long time. And I know that in French, it's a little different. I know some comics in French after 2-3 years that they just do that exclusively, and they do it full time. It was a little different for me, but I loved working in restaurants. I absolutely enjoyed serving. I met some great people. And I always say in life, it should be mandatory. Everybody works in a restaurant for a couple months and travel. Those things, you should have like a life license. All right, now you're ready to go live your life, because you understand how difficult it can be working in hospitality. And if everybody just did it, they would treat servers and busboys and hostesses and people in restaurants much better.
Absolutely.
And again, you meet people from all walks of life and ethnicities and cultures and backgrounds, and serving is like this thing where it sometimes seems impossible. It's so busy, and you're going through it. It's difficult, and at the end of the shift, to quote Mark Maron, you're having a cigarette by the dumpster, and you're like, "We did it!" And it's just this great kind of feeling. And so I really am grateful for my experience in the hospitality, and it allowed me to pursue my stand-up fully.
Man, I agree. Like, I worked in clubs too, man. I was a bouncer for a long time. And yeah, nothing like seeing people at their greatest, you know? After a couple of drinks in the body, man, the drinks are flowing, you know, everything is flowing, man. Left hooks, fucking, you know, grabbing ass cheeks and everything, you know, fights left and right. It was quite the experience, man, and I totally agree. I think every single person should have to, you know, go through that hospitality realm. They have no choice, man. I think it's you need that to become a decent human being, I think. Yeah. It
really shapes you as far as how to treat other people when you're out having dinner, you know.
How was New York, man? And I want to compare both comedy scenes, because yes, we have amazing comedians in Canada, like, you know, like OGs, Norm Macdonald, fucking Jim Carrey, but why Russell Peters, and why does everybody go to the States? Like, do we not have a good enough scene, or is it because of some of the rules and regulations and stuff, or why does everybody have to go to the States to have like this lackluster career, you know?
It's just volume, population. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, we're much bigger geographically than the States, and we have 10 times less people. We have 30 million people. Yeah. So to make a career in Canada, if you're going to be like a club headliner, for example, first of all, our airline prices are insane. To fly to Vancouver, a return flight is $2,000. So if you're going to go do a weekend at the club there, I mean, it's just not worth it. You're going to be out of pocket. And it's just so vast. And so there's like, you know, you have to, especially on the West Coast, there are these West Coast runs, these tours that you do, and you're driving 8-9 hours between gigs and so on. And in the States, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people go, but one is just sheer volume. I mean, they have 300 and some million people. There's cities everywhere, even just the East Coast. When I lived in New York, like within an hour and a half radius, there's hundreds of clubs you can work and sleep in your own bed at night. I mean, you drive an hour, there's cities, you know, you're in New York, there's Boston, there's Philly, there's Hartford, Connecticut, it's just, there's Pittsburgh, all these cities everywhere, just constantly. And so you can travel more, and flights are a lot cheaper in the States. They have way more airlines. They're competitive. They're cheaper flights. And so you can be based out of New York, especially a hub like that, where it flies everywhere. New York, LA, Vegas is a good place for comics, because you could get really cheap flights in and out of Vegas all the time. And so I know comics that live and are based out of Las Vegas because they travel for dirt cheap.
Wow.
And so that's a big element. And also the star system there is very different. It's very comparable, as I said, to Quebec. Quebec is like a micro America when it comes to the star system and the certain steps you can take to make it to a certain level and so on. Whereas English Canada was kind of doomed from the get-go. It was the Yuck Yucks model, where Yuck Yucks never promoted comedians. They promoted the club, meaning if you come to Yuck Yucks on any given weekend, you're going to have a good time. It's going to be good. It's going to be sold out. But
who cares about the artist? Yeah.
Who cares about the artist? In fact, they bragged about this. Jeff Silverman, who's the president of Yuck Yucks, Mark Breslin is the founder. Jeff Silverman is the president, and he wrote a book in the 90s, maybe something like that. And Canadian comics tried to echo what they did in the States. In the late 80s, there was a comedian strike in the States for them to get paid more after the first comedy boom, or during, or whatever. But so they tried to do that in Canada, and Jeff Silverman bragged in his book that he said, "You guys think you sell tickets?" So he went to the local cemetery, took 3 names from the graves, put it on the marquee, and the club was still sold out. So he said, "You guys mean nothing. It's really the brand that sells tickets." Well, it's fine, and it gave work to comedians, but what happens is nobody gave a shit about the comics as far as audience members. And still, it's like that to this day. I can't tell you how many times someone will be like, "Oh man, I went to Yuck Yucks this weekend. The headliner blew my mind. One of the best comics I've ever seen. It was amazing." And I'll be like, "Oh, I for sure know who it was. Who was it?" And they're like, "I don't know his name. I have no clue."
That's true.
I'm like, "Okay, what were they talking about?" They're like, "I don't know, his kids." And they just don't know. Whereas in Quebec and in the States, people latch on. You do a 8-minute opening set in Quebec, and you have 11 new Instagram followers and, 21 likes on Facebook. People just latch on. They understand. They follow you. They know your name right away. If they like you, they follow. It's not like that in English. I'll do a full headline week at a club from Tuesday to Sunday, and I'll get a couple follows, and so many people after the show that they just saw will be like, "Dude, you're amazing. I'm going to follow you on Instagram. What's your name?" They don't even know. I have to tell them it's Julien. I spell it a Julien. It's just that kind of thing, because in English Canada, the brands have been the stars, and that kind of limits what comics could do, because they would never put any money behind any specific comedian. They have a couple of their favorites, like the industry meeting, where they'll push on just for laughs and in clubs, but that it's very small. It's literally, I can count on one hand those comics, and there's hundreds of amazing comics in Canada that will absolutely blow your mind if you see them live, because comedy is very much a live art form. You can watch it on Netflix and YouTube. It's great, but it's nothing like being in the room.
What do you think of the live YouTube shows? Do you think it's worth it for a comedian to, like, when they're starting out? Let's say you have a decent following on YouTube and you're like, "Oh, fuck it, I'll do my own." Like, what's stopping those comedians from doing their own live shows and just putting it on YouTube?
Nothing now with technology.
Yeah.
I will say, if you want to kind of resist early on, I mean, I know people will do their sets early on and they're proud and so on. They put it out there, but it's not, spoiler, it's not good. Like, people will often post their first set ever and on their channels and stuff. And it's brutal. It's fine for what they're doing at that level, but that stays with people. Meaning, let's say you post your first time ever set and you have a good YouTube follow, people watch it. They're like, they like you, and they're still going to consume your online content, but they might not come to a show, and that will stay with them in 5-6 years. If you're performing in their town and they go, "Yeah, he's not great. I've seen his stuff," because that stays with people, even though in 5-6 years you're light years ahead of where you were when you posted that early video. But I would say resist posting early on, and you're also burning your material when you post on social media, meaning comedy is a very visceral art form, right? It elicits a visceral response. You don't see it coming. It's a left turn. It's a surprise. You laugh.
Yeah.
If you know the bit,
like Bert Kreischer or something.
Yeah. That machine story, I can't believe how much he's milked that cow, but
nuts.
People love it. But the thing is, it takes away from it if you've heard it before. So people will come see you, and they go, it's not like music. Music is the opposite. People want to hear the hits. They want to hear because it's an emotional response, music. It's not a visceral response. So people, they don't want to hear the new shit when you go to a concert, your favorite band's concert. They start a new song, you're like, you wait for the classic, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very different in that way. So people can love you to death, and they come to a show and you start a bit they've heard before. They're like, it kind of takes it. Even though they like the bit, they laugh their ass off the first time, they know where you're going with it. So it takes away from it. That's why that people have started in the last few years posting crowd work clips, because that way you don't burn any material. You stay relevant. Your fans see that you're posting updated content, so it keeps the engagement alive. But it's a double-edged sword, because when you post crowd work clips and it's all you're posting and other comics see this and they start posting, so the internet is flooded with crowd work clips. People that have never been to a live comedy show think that's what comedy is.
Yeah.
They think, oh, you go out and you yell out shit and the comic will respond and they'll get a good clip.
Yeah.
So it has bred this new type of audience where heckling is at an all-time high now.
They want to be involved, you know? Yeah.
They want to be involved and they think they're helping. I can't tell you. And spoiler, if you're watching this, it helps 0% of the time.
Yeah,
Just
please shut the fuck up.
Yeah, shut the fuck up. Let the comic do your thing. I was doing a headline week in Toronto, and this guy just was not letting up. And, you know, the longer you do stand-up, you're skilled at dealing with that.
Yeah.
So you are getting good response. So this guy would not shut up. And he kept at it. And I would deal with it and get these big crowd reactions. And it was fine. And then eventually I had to tell him to shut the fuck up. But after he came and he's like, oh, man, that was great. And he's like, you know, I just want to help. You know, I just wanted to. He really legitimately thought he was helping and contributing to the show. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't help. It's fine to have a moment. It's fun to have crowd work moments if the comedian initiates it. If something in the room happens, someone breaks a glass, someone's wearing something weird, you're dressed, you have that banter, it shows that side of your skill set, and it can be fun moments. Also, if you have a week of headline shows, you're doing 10 shows in a week, those moments are fun. So if someone came to multiple shows in that week, at least it'll be a little different because of those moments. So there is place for that. There's room for that. But heckling is, as I said, at an all-time high now. And it's never, it's at an all-time high, but it's almost never malicious. It's never, you know, you suck, get off stage. I mean, that has happened to me early on in my career, but it's never malicious. People always think they're helping, so it's hard to tear into them too much because you see the expression on their face. They're happy to be here. They love what you're doing. They yell out some shit because they think that's what you do because they were on TikTok. So it's hard to rip them apart too much, and so it creates this kind of weird thing. You know, it's so crowd work clips are good because it's as for the reasons I mentioned, but also that there's this other side to it where it's just not. And people are posting crowd work clips where it's poor. It's not even good crowd work.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
They'll be like, how long have you two been together?
Exactly.
Oh, he looked at her. He didn't even know. And they'll post that. It's like, it's such elementary shit, but
it happens. It's the same fucking lines all the time, man. Like, come on, be a little original, man. Like, people like want to. We're a part of the copy culture as well, you know. The with the reels coming out, and then people think like, oh, like I'll just reuse that joke, and you know, and guys, we have proof now. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't 1980 anymore. Like, we've heard that bit, man. You know, like, I don't know.
And people shit on Matt Rife. You know, people think he was an overnight success. He's not. He's been doing comedy for 12 years.
He's pretty solid, man.
He was a good 10 years into it. And the clips that he posts, his crowd work, he's a phenomenal crowd work comic. But that's not what he does. What he does an hour of stand-up. Then he'll do an hour Q&A after, and he'll post those clips from the Q&A. But people don't know this. So then Matt Rife comes to their city, and they're like, I didn't like his stand-up. I like his online stuff better. Because crowd work, also people remember more because they can't believe that it was so spontaneous and in the moment.
Yeah.
And they're part of it, even if it's not them directly. If it was in the audience, that tends to impress an audience more than a well-crafted joke. So people see an hour of well-crafted jokes and are like, it was fine. So it's like that's also a negative side of it. People
like Theo Von.
Yeah, right.
I'm a huge Theo Von fan. His podcast is one of the best out there, and the way he talks to people is hilarious. However, his stand-up stinks. I'm not a fan of his stand-up. And Joe Rogan's last special too, like, well, it was good. It was good, way better than before. But before that, he was kind of in the same thing. Like, yes, okay, you're funny on your podcast, great guests and stuff like that. But when it comes to stand-up, it's completely different, man. And you try to have that same vibe when you're on stage, but it just, if you don't know how to craft the jokes, man, it's not going to work. Like Theo Von, like, I love him to death, but it's just, I don't know, man. It's not the same.
I mean, I say it stinks. I've tried to watch some of his specials.
Well, there you go. There's your answer.
3 minutes. I get 3 minutes in and I'm like, this is insufferable. I can't. And Rogan's special, yeah, there's some premises and bits in there that are fine, but I don't understand why he screams so much.
Yeah.
Like he brings his UFC announcer voice for an hour straight.
Man, if you ate 3 pounds of elk meat per day, buddy, it'd be the same thing for you, man.
Yeah, but if he only spoke, if he delivered his material like he talks on his podcast, it'd be way better. But you can't. It's like nails on a chalkboard. I'm like, what? He goes from screaming to screaming more, then brings it down to screaming again. It's just like it's not necessary, and he's a weird one. He talks too much about how he writes all the time on a typewriter and the process and how tight his material. Then he goes up and it's like, I don't know, some of the stuff he does is pretty hacky. It's outdated. And he screams, but if he just spoke normally,
yeah,
it would have much more of an impact. You don't have to scream to captivate an audience. You can bring it down a little bit.
I loved his last special, honestly, but before that, I was like, man, like, I love this guy, but I have a hard time latching on to what he's saying, I feels like I'd rather hear him talk about conspiracy theories than, do a live set.
Yeah, for sure.
No, man, it's crazy. And what's cool too, well, what's different though, is that people are starting to lighten up a little bit about like the cancel culture and all that shit. Especially in the States, like I watch a lot of Kill Tony. Me and my girlfriend watch Kill Tony every time it comes out. It's amazing, man. But like it feels like people are starting to realize, okay, it's jokes, man. At the end of the day, that's what comedy's for. It's free speech. We're here to say some shit that you won't normally say in a fucking cubicle or something like that. That's what it's made for, right? What happened to you, man? They tried to fucking cancel you, but you're uncancelable. I fucking love it. Like, what happened there? Do you call out somebody and they didn't take it well, or like what was what happened there?
Well, let me say the cancel culture pendulum is swinging back the other way.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
It was at its peak, I think, 2018, 2019. You really couldn't say anything. People going back in time to cancel people for old tweets. I mean, that is just a crazy notion. I mean, thank Christ I didn't have Twitter when I was 14 because I mean, no, but are you kidding me? The thought, people evolve and change. You can't go back and try to cancel someone about a shitty thing they said, especially if they acknowledge to this day it's a shitty thing. It's that we're judging people in today's world by by standards that are 10, 12, 15 years ago. You can't, everything changes. The world evolves, people evolve, people change. And I think things like the Tom Brady roast is great for comedy. I mean, no one pulled the punch, and it's on Netflix, the biggest streamer in the world. Yep. So it is good for comedy. And I think the pendulum is swinging back the other way. And that's why I encourage people to go watch live comedy because it's even more edgy and stuff when it's not on TV. And it's really the last bastion of free speech, even though that is a hacky thing to say. It is true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The thing they tried to I mean, it's so kind of basic shit. So there's this watchdog group in Quebec that call out shows that have only men on the lineup, which fine, totally. There's room for that conversation. I mean, there's so many funny women in comedy, but it's just a numbers game. And there's just, even though there's many funny women, there's just a lot less than men. It's just basic math. And you're not going to put someone on their show just because they're a woman. And they've done comedy twice. The show I booked and got in trouble for, I was booking and hosting at the time, was in Gatineau. And Le Troquet, shout out to Eric, the owner. He's a badass and a good friend. Well, so I'd been called out a few times for booking only men on my show, and I booked women all the time, man. Like
picking and choosing. Yeah.
I'd done the math. In the 2 years I was booking, I'd given I think 90 some spots to women. Wow. Some repeat, not 90 different women, but I gave spots all the time. But I was very lazy in my booking. It was I would book it last minute, and the show was Julien Dionne. Julien Dionne is his ami, right, my friend. So the way I would book it, especially like at that time I was 16, 17 years into comedy. I didn't know what everybody was doing everywhere, all the new up and comers, people that are fresh out the l'École Nationale de l'Humour and all that. I just wasn't in touch with that. So I would literally send out messages the week of, hey, you want to do my show Thursday? This is the budget. So some weeks it would just be dudes on the show, which is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Well, I was called out many times for being misogynistic, boys club and all this. And I'm like, they would never mention the times I booked women, of course, but they would call me out every time I only booked men. Mm-hmm. And again, statistically, it's just going to fucking happen. Yeah. It's nothing. It's not a slight against women. I think women are hilarious. There's some women that are doing amazing work, funnier than most comics I know, even. It's just not even a thing. So, but we would often get called out at Le Troquet for being misogynistic, boys club, another piece of shit, another archaic. So, and I was on their page quite a few times for a few shows I've done. So, and they take a screenshot of the poster and people pile on in the comments. Look at this piece of shit and all that. So to kind of troll them and be left alone, I created an AI generated image of a woman. And on the weeks that I didn't have a woman on my show, I would put her on the poster. I would put the headliner, and all my posters had me and the headliner, and then two or three of the opening acts in small on the bottom and their names. So I'd have this picture of this woman, Sonia Bélanger, and completely fake, and nobody knew I was doing this. At one point, the owner of Le Troquet, Eric, said, "Hey man, who's Sonia Bélanger? I've had a few people ask me about her." And I told him, he was like, yeah, that's pretty funny. And even comics that were coming in from Montreal, the headliners would be like, who's Sonia Bélanger? I've never heard of this woman. And I would tell them, oh, she's not real. And everybody was like, oh, that's funny. I was like, they're not real. I'm just trolling.
It's part of the show, man. It's hilarious. That's a fucking great bit. It's part of the show. Yeah.
It's low-hanging fruit, but whatever.
Yeah.
I was just trolling them. And in fact, a woman comic came to the show, actually Gabi Gatineau. She came to one of my shows to meet Sonia Bélanger because she was like, hey, another sister in the tribe. Business, I want to meet her. And I told her, I'm like, oh, fuck, sorry, Gabi. She's not here because she doesn't exist. And she was like, that's hilarious. And anyway, so they found out this group, I forget their names, who runs it. Anyway, they're amateur comics, angry. And one day I had it was last August, I had a show poster out on my socials for the upcoming Thursday night show in Gatineau. I was here in New Brunswick for a wedding, and I was getting all these notifications, these comments. Hey, we're coming to see Sonia. She better be there. Hey, why can't I find anything about Sonia Bélanger online? Like an abnormal amount.
Yeah,
like, why would people care so much all of a sudden? And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And it turns out they had found out this group and called me out. And their narrative was like, wow, this guy rather create a fake woman than work with real women. And that's not true. So people started hating on me, man, like fucking crazy. And all of a sudden, all these media outlets reached out for interviews. I'm like, I'm not doing interviews. I'm not apologizing. Yeah. It was a dumb, stupid joke. And it just kind of like created this insane wave of hate. It lasted about 2 weeks, but I was public enemy number one, man. It was crazy. And their thing was so idiotic. They said they found out by because they wanted to book her, which is such a bullshit. They said they saw her on my poster a few times, so they wanted to book her for one of their shows. That's so when they looked her up, it's not, you don't see someone on a poster and go, book her. She's on a poster. We got to find out who this is. That's just such bullshit. Anyway, it doesn't even matter. It's all insignificant. Absolutely. And it was just a small blip of in time. And it ended up being a net positive for me. I did a bunch of big podcasts to talk about it, and it was fine. The first show after the quote unquote cancellation was oversold out. We joked about it that night. People had printed Sonia Bélanger's face on these paint mixing sticks, and they held it in front of their face.
Should make merch, man. You should have doubled down and fucking make t-shirts and shit.
Yeah.
Coffee mugs.
And so I didn't do any media interviews. I didn't do it. And that also generated hate because people were like, explain yourself. And I'm like, fuck
Don't have to. Yeah,
you.
fuck you.
I'm gonna have to explain shit. I'm not apologizing. I never did. And that it kind of like the initial wave when people found out what I was doing, because they thought, I mean, here's the thing. If you thought I rather create a fake AI generated woman than to work with real women, then yeah, you should be outraged. Obviously, that's a psychotic thing to do, but that's not the case at all. So they completely lost their mind. And so that generated the first wave of heat, started to die down. And because I wasn't addressing it, I refused all of the interviews from TVA Nouvelle and Le Droit and this and that. I was like, no, I wasn't even replying to reporters. And so they would go with this narrative. Le Droit published this whole article. It was like my picture on the thing. And it was like, he refuses to work with real women. And I'm like, whatever.
Hey, yon droit, man.
No, yeah, exactly. Anyway, it all blew over, and it was nothing. And I keep doing my thing. I'm booked solid, and they're still angry and unbookable. So it doesn't really matter. I feel bad for them. I feel bad that they have to live in this anger constantly, because it's still going, this group. And it's just be funny, be undeniable, and you'll get booked. You don't have to be angry about it. Also, would you really want to be on a show just because you're a woman? Wouldn't you want to be
because of your talent?
On a show? Yeah, because of your talent. And as I said, there's a lot of really funny, really talented women. And the show I was booking on was not an open mic. It was not an amateur night. So I wasn't going to book someone that did stand up twice, as I said before, just because they got on a stage and did stand up twice, and because they're a woman. I was just not going to do that. So it all blew over. It's all insignificant in my life. I really don't think about it until today. And
well, sorry about that.
No, I really, it's again, I really don't care.
Man, you're living your life, man, and you're pretty fucking good at it too, man. What's your schedule looking like in the next following weeks, months?
Well, I took the summer off.
Nice.
And I built this podcast studio I'm sitting in now.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome, man.
Thanks, buddy. And I'm just going to be all over the place. Just kind of go on my website, juliendionne.com. My dates are there. I'm all over Quebec and Ontario. In English, I pretty much stay between Hamilton, Ontario, and Halifax, kind of that corridor. I do my headline weeks at those clubs. And I'll fly out to do corporates and stuff. And I'm trying to regenerate kind of a scene out here in New Brunswick, and just a lot of dates in Quebec too, and a lot of stuff coming up. Fuck
yeah, man. And if you're ever in Gatineau, I would love to have a drink with you, man, in person. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'll be there soon. So I'll for sure let you know. I'm due to do a local show. I haven't since I left in April, so it'll be good to be back.
Beautiful. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, man. I appreciate everyone, especially for the following. Shout out to Matt, man. We had a great live show this Thursday night at Palmail. Thank you to Palmail. It was fucking amazing. Thomas Levac, thank you again. Julien, thank you so much for your time, man. And this won't be the last episode between me and you. I don't think so. So, Julien, I wish you nothing but luck, man, and can't wait to see you in person, brother.
Thanks, buddy. You too, man. All the best.
Yes, sir. Tell a friend, and I'll see you soon. Peace.
I'm the 1 + 9, multiply, you get a dime. You know I ain't got your time on 10. Got the cookies in the grind, sweet sticky product. You know that shit a 10 out of 10. I'm the 1 + 9, multiply, you get a dime. You know I ain't got your time on 10. Got the cookies in the grind, sweet sticky product. You know that shit a 10 out of 10.